Let's turn our attention to the phones and to the doctor. It's Cleared to Play, where we take you inside the tent and get you updated on the latest injuries in the Bay. Proud to partner with UCSF Health on this segment and bring an associate professor of orthopedic surgery, Dr. Nirav Pandya. Doc, how you doing today on this Tuesday?
How are you and Allen doing?
We're doing great and just enjoying getting into a week full of radio. Before we get into the medical questions, I do need to tell people that they're listening to 95.7 The Game, KGMZ FM and HD1 San Francisco, always live on the free Odyssey app, Twitch and YouTube, powered by First NorCal Credit Union. Let's start with Nick Bosa. Not technically an injury per se, but in terms of him being ramped up and cleared to play once he gets healthy, what do you think that lead time will be like when he goes from just working out to being back on the field?
Yeah, you do get a little bit worried as NFL players, even a player like Bosa, who's been obviously probably staying in shape, is obviously quite a physical specimen. But you just can't replicate the intensity of training camp, the explosiveness, the unpredictability of live reps when you're working out on your own. So one of the things we do worry about whenever a player misses training camp or portions of training camp is that you're set up for these soft tissue injuries. And when you look at, you kind of particularly look back at the COVID-shortened season where they really didn't have much training camp, you saw all these injuries stacking up week 1, week 2, week 3, and week 4 of the season. Because basically, if you have a normal training camp, you have time for these soft tissue injuries to heal. So one of the things you do worry about is that will Bosa be able to get back in and be very sharp? Absolutely. But in the season, you don't have time for those soft tissue injuries to heal as you would in training camp. If he has a little bit of soreness in his hip, a little bit of soreness in his hamstring. So that's the one concern that I have. If you can get him in for 7 to 10 days, usually you can kind of eliminate some of that risk. But as the time goes on, you do worry about him being set up for something like that happening.
Doc, sticking with the Niners, Elijah Mitchell now sidelined with a hip injury. We know he's been injured in the past a good bit as well. Whenever I think hip injury, I think either Kevon Looney or Bo Jackson. Is it time for Niners fans to worry about Elijah Mitchell's sustainability as we look at this unofficial depth chart? And we've heard the good things about the other running backs, but in terms of Elijah Mitchell, is it time to worry about his ability to stay on the field?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is a concern. And, I think whenever we hear an MCL injury, we think, oh, it's not an ACL, it's not a meniscus, it's not going to be a big deal. But he had 2 significant MCL injuries that kept him out for a long period of time. And, for the everyday athlete, not a big deal. You get back to working out. But for a football player, particularly at the running back position, you have both of those knees compromised. And then you start seeing hip issues, you start seeing groin issues. And then you worry about, is there some compensation? Is there something that's still there that he's dealing with? Because you have one MCL injury, you're worried about compensation on the other leg. Now, suddenly you've had both MCLs injured. You're coming into a season where you're doing more explosive stuff. Are you going to see this pattern of basically soft tissue injury here, ankle here, hip here, that's just going to kind of plague him throughout the season? So you definitely do worry about, is any kind of compensation from these injuries going to continue to be a problem for him heading into the season, which is where you don't want to be injured coming in.
Lucas, our producer, and I had a bit of I guess it wasn't that fun, but it was a debate as to the nature of the injury. Is it an adductor or an abductor? And it turned out to be an adductor, ADD. But, Doc, what's the difference between an adductor and an abductor injury?
Yeah, so the adductor is basically on the inside part of the leg, which makes sense for Elijah Mitchell having an adductor injury, because if you injure your MCL, which is on the inside part of the leg, your adductor is going to get more strain. The way they kind of taught us in med school was adductor basically adds into the body. So it's the muscle that brings the leg in. The abductors take it away. So those are the muscles on the outside part of the hip. So adductor brings the leg back in, adds into your body, groin muscle. Abductors, kind of more your core hip muscles that bring the hips back out. So kind of the easy way to remember them.
Doc, switching sports here to Shohei Otani as the Giants do battle with the Angels. We've been talking a lot about Shohei's ability to continue to be a starting pitcher and hit throughout his career. He's been dinged up a little bit this season, but just, small injuries, cramping, finger blisters. What do you think in terms of Shohei Otani and his sustainability to continue to be a starting pitcher and hit in this league for a very long time?
Yeah, you absolutely do get worried about that, because obviously we don't have a template of anyone recently doing anything even close to this. And actually, when you hear about the cramping, that's where I actually get a little bit more worried than the blistering, because in baseball players, you don't typically see cramps. I mean, football, basketball, you're exerting yourself. But if you're seeing cramping in a baseball player, that's a key sign that things are starting to wear down. He's starting to get overworked. There's a lot of overuse going on. So that's one of the possibilities. And then you also remember that Shohei, he played 400 to 500 games of baseball even before he reached the MLB. He's taller, which plays a lot more strain across your joints, and he doesn't have those normal rest periods. So I do worry about the sustainability of him doing this consistently. Now, do you potentially see him in a role where he's not starting at pitching and you're bringing him in for 2 to 3 innings later in his career, almost in like an opener or closer type role, and then allowing him to hit more? You may see that evolution over time just to preserve him, because it's a lot of wear and tear. He's exerting himself at a high level night after night, and eventually the body is going to break down unless you're making changes in terms of how he's being utilized.
Anthony DeSclafani's got the elbow strain, and now he has sustained a PRP injection, which will cost him 6 to 8 weeks. Why would a PRP injection maybe set you back a little bit in terms of your ability to come back and be cleared to play?
I think it's a little bit more about, they probably identified that this was an injury that was basically going to take some time to heal. And this injection, in order for a PRP injection to basically have its full effect on, it's going to need at least 4 to 6 weeks. You're basically injecting these platelets in. You want the body to basically heal. Because if you get a PRP injection and you go back and play like a week or two, you're just not allowing that injection time to let things to heal. And part of the reason why they're probably giving it, because it's more severe. And as we kind of talked about a little bit last week, when you do have an issue with that forearm, it can then lead to a UCL injury. So they're like, look, let's nip this in the bud. Let's be aggressive, do the PRP injection, and give this more time to heal, potentially because it's more severe than they thought it was.
Doc, appreciate your time. All the best. And by this time next week, we will have an actual preseason football game to talk about.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Doc. Dr. Nirav Pandya. The proceeding was sponsored by UCSF Health.